Hey, Brett Weiss here. Welcome to Tales from a Retro Gamer, episode number 11. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to open up a near mint condition, complete Nintendo NES from back in the day. This NES has been in my office for many years, just sitting on the shelf. Very beautiful. The box is just gorgeous, very nice. Maybe never used, barely used, whatever. It's a gorgeous system comes with everything complete. So I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Real quick though, I want to tell you a little bit about my personal history with the NES. The NES was test marketed in the US in 1985, and then it was rolled out all across the country in 1986. Now, strangely enough, even though I'm a hardcore gamer, I didn't get my NES until Christmas of 1987. My brother gave it to me for Christmas, 87. Amazing. This is a parent level gift given to me by my brother, my older brother Scott. It wasn't something I asked for. It was just showed up under the tree. I was blown away. Very, very cool. Even stranger, I hadn't actually played an NES until Christmas of 1987 when he gave it to me. The reason being, I was 20 years old at this point. I had an Atari, a ColecoVision, and television hooked up. I had an Odyssey 2. Those systems kept me plenty busy. I was 20. Instead of going over to my friends' houses playing video games like I had in the past, I was going out on dates, we were going to parties and doing all that kind of stuff. The parties weren't video game themed, so for several reasons, I just hadn't played an NES until 1987, until I got one. And I was absolutely blown away by Super Mario Brothers. Could not believe the expansive worlds, the hidden secrets. The controls were just perfect. The controller for the NES I love better than any system that came before it. Freedom of movement, the D-pad works great. Love it. So I absolutely love the NES, and I was like, I couldn't believe I waited a couple of years to get an NES console. I'm assuming I would have gotten one in 88 or 89 or at some point, but regardless, my brother got me one in 87. Very, very cool. So I'm going to show you this one I found. So let's flash forward a few years after I got my NES. Many years. About 15 years ago, I was walking around Goodwill. Now I've been game collecting forever and ever. Garage sales, thrift stores, flea markets, pawn shops, all that good stuff. So, I'm a game chaser, hardcore, to put it in Billy and Jay terms. So I was walking around Goodwill. This would have been probably the early 2000s. And I'm just looking in their game section, always looking in their CD section to see if there happens to be any PlayStation games, PlayStation 1 games over there. I'm looking at their DVDs to see if there happen to be any PlayStation 2 games there or whatever. And their game section didn't have much, so I'm just kind of walking around the rest of the store. Well, suddenly there's a Goodwill worker there with a shopping cart. In that shopping cart was this. It was sort of angled in there, and there were some other things in the cart. It looked like what she was doing was putting stuff out in the store. She was restocking. And so I asked her about it. I said, so how much is the NES? How much is the Nintendo? And she goes, well, I'm thinking about putting that in the auction. Now, if you're a Goodwill diehard like I am, you go in there a lot, they have auctions every Saturday. And you can write your name in and, sign up for, put your amount that you're willing to pay and all that stuff. So it's a write-in auction, but then on Saturday you can show up and bid as well. And she said she was thinking about putting this in the auction. I was like, well, could you possibly sell it? I was like, how much would it be? And she goes, oh, $20. And so I was like, that, great deal. The box looked great. I thought, excellent. Definitely, I'll take it. And so before I even looked inside, I was absolutely willing to pay $20 for an NES. Obviously I already had one. The one I still had that I'd gotten for Christmas in '87. Still had it hooked up. But one in the box, I thought that would look really cool on my shelf. Great addition to the collection. Worth a little bit of money, that kind of stuff. And so without further ado, let's open this up. When I was in the store, before I took it to the register, I kind of opened it a little bit just to look inside. Looked beautiful, and it looked complete, which it is. And so let's open that up real quick and just take a look. Now, first, the box is in absolutely beautiful condition. Sharp corners for the most part. Really colorful. Looks great all around. No tears. Really, really nice condition. On the side, you've got screenshots for several games, Zelda 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, two of the best games for the console, in my opinion. Really great stuff. So let's open it up. Gonna slide it out carefully because I intend to put it back on the shelf when I'm through because it's a beautiful display piece in my office. And the pack-in styrofoam looks pretty good. and it comes with all kinds of paperwork, catalogs and things. So let's look and see what we've got here. We've got an ad for Nintendo Power. You can subscribe to Nintendo Power. And so obviously the NES brought back the home console market in 85, 86 after the great video game crash. What Nintendo also brought back was magazines. Video game magazines had pretty much died out in the mid 80s for the most part. But Nintendo Power came back in the late 80s. And you've obviously got some ads to subscribe for Nintendo Power here. Really good, colorful magazine. Biased probably because it is a Nintendo product, but very colorful, a lot of good tips and tricks and a lot of information about the games. Warning, do not use with front or rear projection TV. If you're old like I am, you remember the front and rear projection TVs. Big, huge behemoths, big screen, but ugly, fuzzy visuals. Still, people thought they were pretty cool back then, but it says not to use it with one of those type of TVs. You've got the warranty registration information. You've got the, of course, you have to have the owner's manual for the control deck. The NES was originally called a control deck instead of a video game system because of the retailers were afraid after the great video game crash when Nintendo was trying to sell the idea of bringing video games back, console video games back to the US, they didn't want to scare buyers away with the word video game, so they tried to advertise it, calling it a control deck, packaging it, earlier systems with Rob the Robot and the gun and all that good stuff. Now, I really like this. This is worthy of putting on the wall in your game room or office or whatever. It's a full poster with some ads for some cool early NES games like Metroid, Donkey Kong Classics, Pinball, several others. Really neat. Poster worthy. But on the reverse side, it's actually practical as well because it shows you how to hook up your NES. Pretty easy to hook up an NES, obviously, but just in case, it did come with instructions. Now this is interesting. This was a club I did not actually join, but you could, back in the day when you could join the official Capcom Craze Club. Now for just $3.95, you could join this club and you would get, it wasn't a great club because you would just get, it was pretty much ads for Capcom games. You did get a 4-color poster of your choice, DuckTales, Mega Man, Strider, or Codename Viper, a special strip starring Mega Man, woohoo, Capcom newsletter, catalog offering limited Capcom memorabilia. It was basically an advertisement for Capcom. Now, this would have been released before Street Fighter 2 and all that good stuff, but you've got ads for Mega Man 2, DuckTales, Bionic Commando, Mickey Mouse Capade, and on and on. So anyway, did any of you ever join the official Capcom Craze? I'd be curious about that. Later in the comment section below, you can definitely let me know. So let's get to the system itself. The NES Toaster, as they call them. Now, when I bought this at Goodwill, it still came in this sleeve. The owner obviously took very good care of it. Now, this looks almost unplayed when you are, or maybe it was played a little bit, because when you do the door, it's kind of stiff feeling. When you open the tray, it's very stiff. The buttons are very sure, and it's just in beautiful condition. It's not scuffed at all. It looks absolutely brand new. It is gorgeous. Either barely played or not played at all, but it's gorgeous. Let's set that aside for a moment while I can show you the hookups. Comes with the AV in and out. Comes with the RF switch. And like I said, all of this stuff just looks just gorgeous. No scuffing at all. And the AC adapter. And the controllers, once again, they are in the plastic sleeves as well. Now I love the NES controller. It fits very nicely in your hand. The D-pad works great. The buttons are great. It's got start. Unlike the Sega Master System where you have to pause it on the console, you can pause it on the, using the controller. And both D-pads, both controllers, I should say, are packaged in the plastic. So the owner put the sleeves back on, never played it. The buttons are very sure, very firm. So this NES was barely used, if at all. Anyway, so what I wanted to do to take you back to the late 80s, early 90s with the brand new Nintendo NES, this is what you got in the control deck set. So I appreciate you watching this. I hope you enjoyed, to me, I loved box games, box systems, because it's like traveling into the past. If you bought an NES back then, brought it home, this is what you would have gotten. So, the NES has been a very, very influential system to me, just like the Atari 2600, ColecoVision. In fact, I wrote 2 books covering the system. The first one I wrote was Classic Home Video Games 1985 through 1988. Now, those years on the cover refer to the console era. The NES, Sega Master System, and Atari 7800 were released during that era, and so this book covers those 3 systems, every single cartridge for those games, or for those systems. And the second book I wrote that has a lot of NES in it is the 100 Greatest Console Video Games 1977 through 1987. Now, this one has those early great NES titles like Zelda, like Metroid, like Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong Jr., Popeye. A lot of great stuff in this book as well. So, my question for you this week is, not only did you join the Capcom Club back in the day, did you ever find a really old game system or cartridge or whatever in the wild that was either just near mint and perfect and beautiful, factory sealed, complete with everything? What is your best find that you've ever made for, a console that just came complete with everything and that was really cheap, or that was factory sealed or whatever? If you have any great finds you want to tell us about, just put them in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. Now, last week I talked about Crazy Climber. That's a game I played back in 1980 at the arcades when it came out, and I've been playing it recently on the Nintendo Switch. And I did have some really good comments on that video. Now, several people mentioned that, I'd asked what their favorite climbing game was and what their experience with Crazy Climber was. Several people mentioned that they like Donkey Kong and Burger Time. Those are probably the 2 most popular, what we now call, or what we back then we called climbing games, which now are called non-scrolling platformers. So let's see what Gamer Logic had to say. He said, Crazy Climber, with an exclamation point. The Underground Retrocade has a cabinet of it, and I had a lot of fun figuring out the controls on it. It's one of those classics that slipped by me, because he's been playing it recently at the Underground Retrocade. But I started playing it on the Famicom last year and fell in love with it. Great video, Brett. Well, thanks, Gamer Logic. I appreciate it. Speaking of the Famicom version of Crazy Climber, it had 8 buildings to climb, unlike the 4-building original Crazy Climber. And GamesR says, we had a little arcade in my tiny town that was more or less a trailer set up in a parking lot. The name of the arcade was the Jolly Trolley. They had a Crazy Climber that always got a couple of my quarters when I visited. Eventually, my mom stopped letting us go there because she heard kids were selling drugs there. I wouldn't have known it if they were. A lot of parents back in the day, back in the 70s, 80s, sort of saw arcades as a speakeasy for kids, sort of a dingy, dark, smelly cigarettes, beer place where, they were kind of afraid for their kids to be there. They might meet with some, kind of gross people, or might even be in a little bit of danger. I went to the arcades all the time, never had that problem. Some arcades were, really nice and well lit. Some of them were dingy and kind of scary, and the scarier ones were actually maybe a little more fun. But that's a story for another day. Next, Brian Ashmore Studio commented, I picked up Crazy Climber on the Switch as well. I've wanted a home version since the early 80s. I get just as excited for a vintage arcade game finally coming home as I do a AAA title for the new systems. My favorite climbing game is definitely Donkey Kong. That one blew me away. Talk about cartoon graphics. So I was more than excited when Nintendo was finally able to release the original arcade ROM on the Switch. Now, for years, when Nintendo would come out with a Donkey Kong game for their current console, like for the NES and like for the Game Boy Advance, they would put for the Game Boy Advance or whatever, for some of their collections, they would put the NES version of Donkey Kong, and I was like, where's the arcade version? Because the NES version of Donkey Kong was missing the Pie Factory screen. And so people would want and it was missing it just wasn't a complete version of Donkey Kong. And so Brian Ashmore Studio was very happy that Nintendo Switch now has a complete version of the original arcade Donkey Kong. So that's very cool. Anyway, thanks guys for the comments. I really appreciate it. Now you'll notice I'm wearing my Classic Game Fest shirt today. That's because Classic Game Fest is coming up July 27th and 28th. I will be there as a special guest. Jeffrey Wittenhagen and I, another author, will be there Saturday and Sunday all day. On Saturday at 2, we'll be doing a panel about content creation. The very next weekend, August 3rd, Mo GameCon, I'm doing a show. I'm a special guest there as well. Thanks to John Riggs and Kelsey Lewin for recommending that show. I'm super excited about it. It sounds like it's going to be great. I'll be joined by guests like the gaming historian, Walter Day, Jay from the Game Chasers, and several other guests. I'm super excited about that. Now, the following weekend, so we got 3 shows in a row coming up where I'm a guest. Let's Play Gaming Expo is August 9th through 11th. It's in Irving, Texas, between Dallas and Fort Worth, so that'll be a quick 30-minute drive for me. Super excited about all 3 shows. I cannot wait. So if you could like this video, I'd really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed looking back at what pretty much a new Nintendo would look like coming out of the box. With all the packaging, or most of the packaging, I should say, the catalogs and all that good stuff. Brand new, mint condition. I hope you enjoyed that. If you could like this video, I'd appreciate it. If you could click on that subscribe button below, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. Peace out.